Hello, time for chapter 4 of Finn Family Moomintroll by Tove Jannson, and illustrated by Tove Jannson and published by Puffin. Thank you, Puffin. Chapter 4, in which, owing to the hattifatteners' night attack, the snork maiden loses her hair, and in which the most remarkable discovery is made on Lonely Island. Let's get in. In the middle of the night, the snork maiden woke up with an awful feeling. Something had touched her face. She didn't dare to look, but sniffed uneasily around her. There was a smell of burning, so she pulled a blanket over her head and called tremulously to Moomintroll. He woke up at once and asked her what was the matter. "There's something dangerous in here," came a muffled voice from under the carpet. "I can feel it." Moomintroll stared into the darkness. There was something, little lights, pale gleaming shapes that pattered to and fro between the sleepers. Moomintroll was terrified and woke Snufkin. "Look," he gasped, "ghosts!" "It's all right," said Snufkin. "Those are hattifatteners. The thundery weather has electrified them. That's why they shine so. Keep quite still, otherwise you might get an electric shock." The hattifatteners seemed to be looking for something. They poked about in all the hampers, and the burning smell became stronger, and then they all collected in the corner where the Hemulin was sleeping. "Do you think they're after him?" asked Moomintroll anxiously. "They're probably only looking for the barometer," said Snufkin. "I warned him not to take it, and now they've found it." The hattifatteners were all clinging to the barometer, and they clambered up onto the Hemulin so as to reach it better. The smell of burning was very strong now. Sniff woke up and began to whimper, and at the same time there was a piercing scream. A hattifattener had trodden on the Hemulin's nose. In a moment everybody was awake and on their feet, and pandemonium broke out. Hattifatteners were trodden on, Sniff got an electric shock, the Hemulin rushed about screaming with terror, and then entangled himself in the sail so that the whole tent collapsed on top of them. It was quite frightful. Sniff maintained afterwards that it was at least an hour before they'd found their way out of the sail. Perhaps he exaggerated a bit. But by the time they had all sorted themselves out, the hattifatteners had disappeared into the wood with the barometer, and nobody had the least desire to follow them. The Hemulin, moaning piteously, thrust his nose into the sand. "This has gone too far," he said. "Why can't a poor innocent botanist live his life in peace and quiet?" "Life is not peaceful," said Snufkin contentedly. "Look, children," said Moominpapa, "it has cleared up, and soon it will begin to get light." Moominmamma shivered and clutched her handbag tight as she looked out over the stormy night sea. "Shall we build a new house and try to sleep again?" she asked. "That wouldn't be any use," said Moomintroll. "Let's wrap ourselves up in the blankets and wait till the sun gets up." So they sat in a row on the beach, very close to one another, and Sniff sat in the middle because he thought it was the safest. The night was nearly over now, and the storm was far away, but the breakers still thundered in over the sand. The sky began to grow pale in the east, and it was very cold. And then, in the first light of dawn, they saw the hattifatteners setting out in their boats to leave the island. Boatloads of them glided away like shadows from beyond the point and steered out to sea. The Hemulin breathed a sigh of relief. "I hope I never see a hattifattener again," he said. "They're probably looking for a new island to themselves," said Snufkin enviously, "a secret island that nobody will ever find." And he followed the little boats with longing eyes. The snork maiden was sleeping with her head in Moomintroll's lap when the first golden streak showed on the eastern horizon. A few little puffs of cloud that the storm had forgotten turned a soft shale pink, then the sun lifted his shining head over the sea. Moomintroll bent down to wake the snork maiden up, and then he noticed a terrible thing. Her beautiful fluffy fringe was burned right off. It must have happened when the hattifatteners brushed against her. What would she say? How could he comfort her? It was a catastrophe. The Snork Maiden opened her eyes and smiled. "Do you know," said Moomintroll hastily, it's most extraordinary, but as time goes on, I'm beginning to prefer girls without hair." "Really?" she said with a look of surprise. "Why is that?" "Hair looks so untidy," replied Moomintroll. The Snork Maiden immediately lifted up her paw to pat her hair, but alas, all she got hold of was a little burnt tuft, which she stared at in horror. "You've gone bald," said Sniff. "It suits you. Really," Moomintroll said consolingly. "Please don't cry." But the Snork Maiden threw herself down on the sand and wept bitterly over the loss of her crowning glory. They all crowded around, trying to cheer her up, but in vain. "Listen," said the Haemlin, "I was born bald on top, and I get along very well." "We'll rub your head with oil, so it's sure to grow again," said Moomin Papa. "And then it will be so curly," added Moomin Mama. "Will it really?" sobbed the Snork Maiden. "Of course it will," soothed Moomin Mama. "Think how sweet you'll look with curly hair." So the Snork Maiden stopped crying and sat up. "Look how lovely it is," said Snufkin. The island had been washed by the rain, and now it sparkled in the early morning sunlight. "I shall play a morning song," he went on, taking out his mouth organ. So they all sang lustily after him. "There's no need to worry or fear or fret. There's plenty of life in all of us yet. The hattifatteners, every one, have sailed away to the morning sun, and after beauty we'll never more crave, for the Snork Maiden's getting a permanent wave." "Come and bathe!" cried Moomintroll, and the whole lot pulled on their swimming trunks and rushed out into the breakers, except for the Haemlin and Moomin Mama and Papa, who thought it was still too cold. Glass, green and white waves rolled in over the sand. Oh, to be a Moomin, and to dance in the waves while the sun gets up! The night was forgotten, and a long June day lay before them. They dived like porpoises through the waves and sailed in on the crests towards the beach where Sniff was playing in the shallow water. Snufkin was floating on his back far out and looking up into the blue and gold sky. Meanwhile, Moomin Mama was making coffee and looking for the butter jar which she'd hidden from the sun in the damp sand, but she looked in vain. The storm had washed it away. "Oh dear, what can I give them for sandwiches?" she wailed. "Never mind," said Moomin Papa. "We'll see if the storm has given us something else instead. After coffee we'll make a tour of inspection along the beach and see what the sea has washed up." And this they did. On the further side of the island, shining, slippery rocks reared out of the sea, and there you could find both patches of shell-strewn sand, the mermaids' private dance floor, and secret black chasms into which the breakers thundered as though they were battering on an iron door. In fact, there were caves and gurgling whirlpools and all manner of exciting things to be found. Everyone set out on his own to see what had been washed up. This is the most exciting occupation, for you can always find the strangest things, and it's often quite difficult and dangerous to save them from the sea. Moomin Mama clambered down to a little patch of sand which was hidden by some fearsome rocks. Here clumps of blue sea pinks grew, and the sea oats rattled and whistled as the wind forced its way up their narrow stalks. She lay down in a sheltered spot from which she could see only the blue sky and the sea pinks that waved over her head. "I'll rest just a little while," she thought, but soon she was fast asleep in the warm sand. But the Snork ran to the top of the highest hill and looked around. He could see from shore to shore, and the island seemed to him to float like a giant water lily on the uneasy sea. He saw Sniff, just a speck, looking for wreckage. He even caught a sight of Snufkin's hat, and surely that was the Haemlin digging up a rare shell orchid, and there wasn't that where the lightning had struck? A terrible crag, bigger than 10 Moomin houses, had been split like an apple by the lightning, and the two halves had fallen apart, leaving a deep cleft between them. The Snork climbed, trembling, into the crag, and he looked up at the dark cliff walls which the lightning had split open. The stone was as black as ebony, but through it ran a bright and shining streak. It was gold. It must be gold. Snork poked about with his penknife. A little grain of gold came loose and fell into his paw. He picked out one piece after another, getting hot with excitement, digging out bigger and bigger pieces. After a time he had forgotten everything but the brilliant vein of gold which the lightning had brought to light. He wasn't a beachcomber any more. He was a gold digger. Meanwhile, Sniff had made a very simple find, but he was just as happy over it. He had found a lifebelt. It was slightly rotted by seawater, but it fitted him perfectly. Now I can go into the deep water, he thought, and I'm sure I shall soon be able to swim as well as the others. Won't Moomintroll be surprised? A little further away, amongst the birch bark, floats and seaweed, he discovered a raffia mat, a broken dipper, and an old boot without a heel. Wonderful treasures when you steal them from the sea. And then in the distance he caught sight of Moomintroll, who was standing out in the water struggling with something. Something big. What a pity that I didn't see it first, thought Sniff. What in the world can it be? And now Moomintroll had got his find out of the water and was rolling it in front of him up the beach. Sniff craned his neck, and then he saw what it was. A boy. A big and gorgeous boy. "Pee-hoo!" shouted Moomintroll. "What do you think of this?" "It's quite nice," said Sniff critically with his head on one side. "But what do you think of this?" And he displayed his find on the sand. "The lifebelt is lovely," replied Moomintroll, "but what is the use of half a dipper?" "It'll probably do if you bail quickly," said Sniff. "Listen, what do you say to a swap? The raffia mat, the dipper, and the boot for that old boy?" "Never in your life," said Moomintroll, "but perhaps the lifebelt for this rarey object that must have drifted here from a distant land." And he held up a glass ball and shook it. And then up whirled a mass of snowflakes inside, settling gradually to rest on a little house with windows of silver paper. "Oh," said Sniff. And a great struggle was going on inside him because he couldn't bear to part with anything, not even in exchange. "Look," said Moomintroll, and he shook the snow up again. "I don't know," said Sniff doubtfully. "I really don't know which I like best, the lifebelt or your snowstorm." "I'm pretty sure it's the only one in the world at the moment," said Moomintroll. "But I can't give up the lifebelt," wailed Sniff. "Dear Moomintroll, couldn't we just share the little snowstorm?" Said Moomintroll. "Couldn't I just hold it sometimes?" begged Sniff. "On Sundays?" Moomintroll thought for a bit, and then he said, "Well, all right. You can have it on Sundays and Wednesdays." Meanwhile, Snufkin was wandering along with only the waves for company. He had a wonderful time jumping out of their way just at the last minute and laughing as they snapped in vain at his boots. Just beyond the point he met Moominpapa, who was salvaging driftwood. "Fine, eh?" he puffed. "We can build a landing stage for the adventure with this." "Shall I help you to drag it up?" asked Snufkin. "No, no," said Moominpapa, a little shocked. "I can manage it all alone. Can't you find something of your own to drag up?" There was a great deal to be salvaged, but nothing that Snufkin cared about. Small barrels, half a chair, a basket without a bottom, an ironing board, heavy, troublesome things. Snufkin stuck his hands in his pockets and whistled. He preferred teasing the waves. But out on the point, the Snork maiden was clambering about on the rocks. She had decorated her singed brow with a crown of sea lilies, and she was searching for something that would surprise all the others and make them jealous. When they had admired it, she would give it to Moomintroll, as long as it wasn't something she could use to make herself beautiful. It was bothersome climbing about on the stones, and her crown was beginning to blow off. But at any rate, the wind wasn't so strong now, and the sea had changed from an angry green to a peaceful blue. The waves no longer seemed threatening, but tossed their plumes with a gay air. The Snork maiden climbed down onto a little pebbly beach which bordered the water's edge, but there was nothing to be seen except a little seaweed and some bits of driftwood. A little downhearted, she strolled further out along the point. "It's sad that everyone except me does so much," thought the Snork maiden to herself. "They retrieve magic hats and capture antlions and carry off barometers. I wish I could do something tremendous all on my own, and impress Moomintroll. Sighing to herself, she looked out over the deserted beach, and then her heart nearly stopped beating, for out on the point a shape was washing to and fro in the shallow water, and it was tremendously big, 10 times as big as a little snork maiden. "I'll run and fetch the others," she thought, and then stopped, telling herself not to be frightened but to have a look and see what it was. So, trembling in every limb, she went up to the awful thing to find it was nothing less than a giantess. A giantess without legs. How terrible! The snork maiden took a few shaky steps forward, but then came the biggest surprise of all. The giantess was made of wood, and she was very beautiful. Her cheeks and lips were red, and her round blue eyes smiled up through clear water. She had blue hair, too, flowing in long, painted curls over her shoulders. "It's a queen," said the snork maiden reverently. The beautiful creature's hands were crossed on her breast, which was hung with golden flowers and chains. Her dress was of soft, flowing red material, and she was all of painted wood. The only strange thing was that she hadn't got a back. "She is almost too good for Moomintroll," mused the snork maiden, "but he shall have her in any case," and she was very proud when, towards evening, she paddled into the harbour, perched on the Queen's middle. "Have you found a boat?" asked the snork. "Fancy your being able to find it all alone," said Moomintroll admiringly. "It's a figurehead," said Moominpapa, who in his youth had sailed the 7 seas. "Sailors like to decorate the prows of their ships with a beautiful wooden queen." "What for?" asked Sniff. "Oh, I suppose they like ladies," said Moominpapa. "But why hasn't she got a back?" asked the Hemulin. "But that's where she's fixed to the ship's prow, of course," said the snork. "Even a child could see that." "She's too big to be nailed to the Adventure," said Snufkin. "What a pity." "Oh, what a beautiful lady," sighed Moomin-Mama. "Imagine being so pretty and getting no happiness out of it." "What do you think of doing with it?" asked Sniff. The snork maiden lowered her eyes and smiled, and then she said, "I think I shall give it to Moomintroll." Moomintroll was speechless, very pink in the face. He advanced and bowed, and the snork maiden curtsied shyly, and they were both rather embarrassed. "Look," said the snork to his sister, "you haven't seen what I've found." And he pointed proudly to a great pile of shimmering gold that lay on the sand. The snork maiden's eyes nearly popped out. "Real gold," she breathed. "Oh, and there's lots more," boasted the snork, "a mountain of gold." "And I'm allowed to keep all the bits he drops," said Sniff proudly. Oh, how they admired each other's finds there on the beach. The Moomin family had suddenly become rich, but the most precious things were still the ship's figurehead and the little snowstorm in the glass ball. The boat was indeed heavily laden when she sailed away from Lonely Island after the storm. Behind her floated a big raft carrying the driftwood that they collected. Their cargo consisted of the gold, the little snowstorm, the gorgeous big buoy, the boot, the dipper, the lifebelt, and the raffia mat. And in the prow lay the figurehead gazing out to sea. Beside her sat Moomintroll with his paw on her beautiful blue hair. He was so happy. The snork maiden couldn't keep her eyes off them. "Oh, if only I were as beautiful as the wooden queen," she thought. "But I haven't even got my fringe left." And she didn't feel gay any more. "Do you like the wooden queen?" she asked Moomintroll. "Very much," he answered without looking up. "But I thought you said you didn't approve of girls with hair," said Snork Maiden. "Besides, she's only painted." "Oh, but so beautifully painted," said Moomintroll. This was almost too much for the Snork Maiden. She stared down into the sea with a lump in her throat and went very pale. "The wooden queen looks so stupid," she said at last. Then Moomintroll looked up. "Why are you so pale?" he asked in surprise. "Oh, nothing in particular," she answered. Then he clambered down from the prow and sat beside her. And after a while he said, "Do you know, the wooden queen looks terribly stupid, actually." "She does, doesn't she?" said the Snork Maiden, getting her colour back once again. "Do you remember that golden butterfly we saw?" asked Moomintroll, and the Snork Maiden nodded, tired and happy. Far away, Lonely Island lay flaming in the light of the sunset. "I wonder what you're thinking of doing with the Snork's gold," said Snufkin. "I think we shall use it to decorate the edges of flower beds," said Moomin Mama. "Only the big bits, of course, because the other ones look so rubbishy." Then, in silence, they watched the sun dive into the sea and the colours fade from blue and violet, while the adventure rocked gently homeward. Yep, there it is. Well, that was chapter 4 of Finn Family Moomintroll by Tove Jannson. And shortly I shall read you another chapter, but I shan't do it right now. It's time to pack it in and to say see you soon, and be good and be kind and stay safe. And I will see you very soon. Bye then.